Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast today. I'm happy today to be talking about the data dashboard I was recently a part of that's now developed and available for folks to look at. This is a data dashboard on carbon in Minnesota's forests. And so in my position with
Welcome to the Forest Analytics
Department
Landing
of Forest
Podcast.
Resources,
I'm your host,
my
Matt
previous
Russell.
position.
In this podcast,
developed
we'll talk about how
a
data and
dashboard
analytics are
using a
transforming
lot
the
of
forest
different
products
carbon
industry.
information across
We'll share how a
Minnesota.
research-based
And I think it's a
approach to
really important
analytics can empower your
tool,
forestry
a really
organization
important,
to
way
make better
convey
decisions
just
with your
how
data.
much carbon is found in the state. And I think it has a lot of applications to other states and other regions and other ownerships as well. And so I think it's one of the big things with carbon is that it's very it can quickly get very confusing about units that you're using. Are you talking about tons per acre? Are you talking about metric tons per hectare? And so what I really like with this data dashboard that we've developed, is that it has a lot of information about just kind of distilling down all of the complex information with regard to carbon stocking, carbon sequestration, and different components related to that. So I just wanted to share a couple of highlights from this project. And it's really two kinds of things that I'll highlight. The first is the report and really the year-long project that we were engaged in. And so I do want to give special thanks to the Minnesota Forest Resources Council for funding this project. About a year ago, they approached us and were really interested in understanding carbon in Minnesota's forests. And so that's really what we've done over the last year, was to develop what we call the scoping document for forest carbon in the state of Minnesota. And so I thought I'd just touch on just a couple of highlights of the report because I think, like I said, it could be replicated in other areas, other states, other regions, other ownerships, depending on the needs of that area. And so one of the first things we identified was different information needs and opportunities related to forest carbon. As many of you know, there's been a tremendous investment in forest carbon when it comes to the environmental, social, and governance motivations for investment now. There's a lot of interest in forests and the role that they can play in investing. And so when it comes to these information needs and opportunities, many of them focus around kind of the idea of carbon markets and where that fits in. And that was really one of the themes that was identified through this project, but also other ones related to forest management, especially as people are interested in adaptive silviculture techniques to prepare for climate change. There was a lot of interest around information and research needs relating to forest management. And then the other kind of broad theme about some of these information needs that we identified related to data and technology. And so how might we best be able to use and to really bring together things like remote sensing data, things like other auxiliary data sets to better understand forest carbon attributes, if we can then link that to, say, an on-the-ground forest inventory that we might have at our disposal. And so another big key takeaway from this project and this report that we developed was just the tremendous value of the U.S.'s forest inventory and analysis data. And so in Minnesota, it's a state that is very blessed. It has about 6,300 forested plots for just pretty close to 18 million acres of forest. So it's about one plot for every 2,800 acres of forest. And so there's some double sampling that goes on in some of the areas. And so compared to other states, Minnesota has a great network of FIA plots that can be used to inform forest carbon attributes and some of the understanding. And then another big part of that in terms of how data were compiled was also from the greenhouse gas emissions and removals data set that's been recently published by the U.S. Forest Service here for the last several years as they developed that report for the Environmental Protection Agency. And so a key takeaway is just the value of FIA data in providing forest carbon information. Another key takeaway was just a comparison of where the state that we were working in Minnesota, how does that compare to how other states are dealing with forest carbon in their own ways? And so every state is looking at carbon opportunities in different ways. And one of the things that we did in this project was to identify 15 different states where it seemed like something was going on in terms of forest carbon that is mostly investment from the state level, So whether it be the state's Department of Natural Resources or some legislative actions that have created some initiatives related to forest carbon, we tried to identify those. And so the table, I think, that can serve as a handy resource to compare some of those state-level investments in forest carbon, and really to help to identify some of those research needs and opportunities. Another key takeaway from the project was the value of growth and yield simulations. And so as a part of this project, we identified and we ran several simulations for 4 of the primary forest types in Minnesota. And so we're very interested in understanding, for the most common trees and forests, how might we use a program to simulate what growth and yield might be. And so for each of these 4 forest types, and we chose red pine, aspen, kind of mesic hardwoods, and then I'm blanking on the 4th one, oak systems. And so for those different forest types, we simulated 3 different silvicultural treatments. The first one was really no silviculture or no management, to kind of get a sense of what the landscape might look like if left just to grow. A second one was kind of a business as usual treatment. And so this was really identified as something that's commonly used today in the landscape. And then the 4th one was a climate adaptive treatment. So trying to identify something that folks are thinking about or maybe even have done to better use climate adaptation silviculture in their forest management plans. And so that was another treatment that we had done on each of these different treatments or in each of these different forest types. And then we used the forest vegetation simulator to forecast what those forests might look like. And so the forest vegetation simulator being one of the most commonly used programs for forecasting forests and their inventories in through time. And then finally, another takeaway from the project report was that the carbon markets and what are the opportunities for landowners. And so by landowners, we really mean not just the large landowners that own, several 100,000 or millions of acres of lands that have already been thinking about carbon and what it means for their organization. But we really focused on the small private woodland owner. And so we really emphasized, in particular, the voluntary markets, which seem to be more approachable to those small private landowners, folks with 20 acres, 60 acres, that have historically been left out of the forest carbon markets. And so we kind of present a nice overview of what the current landscape is for carbon markets for some of these smaller landowners. So that kind of wraps up the report. But I did want to mention, too, that one of the big outcomes of this project was really this forest carbon data dashboard that we developed. And I really need to give kudos to Chris Edgar, who's at the Department of Forest Resources at the University of Minnesota, who really led this data dashboard development, along with our U-Spatial team. So U-Spatial is a group that does a lot of stuff with spatial data, GIS at the University of Minnesota, and they were just a fantastic group to work with to develop this forest carbon dashboard. And so the dashboard is really there to provide a summary of Minnesota's forest carbon resource, and you're able to query information by forest type, ownership, regions, and stocking levels. And so it's a really handy tool to kind of look at all that FIA data that Minnesota has, all the greenhouse gas emissions and removals data, to better understand where carbon is and how it's moved through time, at least going back to the 1990 baseline, which is a part of many forest carbon assessments. And so we've used ArcGIS Online to develop the data dashboard. It's really interactive and easy to use. Some of the data tables that kind of underlie it present carbon stocks and carbon flux estimates that go back to 1990. And so, like I said, many of the units are confusing. And so we include information on carbon stocks and then also their carbon dioxide equivalents to provide some of that information. And so I really encourage you, I'll add a link to the carbon data dashboard in the notes. I would love feedback on it, and really, really interested in kind of, as you look at the carbon data dashboard, what data on forest carbon would be most beneficial to you. And so there's a lot of information out there. It seems like in talking with people and organizations, people are valuing different things and need different answers for different attributes when it comes to forest carbon. And so I'd love to hear about what data on carbon would be most beneficial to you. And so you can drop me a line anytime. My email is matt@arbor-analytics.com, and I'd love to learn more. So thanks everyone for listening. Hope you have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Forest Analytics Landing Podcast. For more information on how data and analytics can empower your organization, visit arbor-analytics.com.